Out on the Dakota plains, the wind sounds like a scream. On a night like this, a November night with a blizzard clawing at the door, it sounds like the whole world is dying. And in her small cabin at the edge of town, Clara Morrison felt like she was the last person left to hear it. The town of Cedar Ridge was just a collection of dim lights in the distance, a place that had turned its back on her 2 years ago, the day they put her husband Thomas in the ground. They called her the Black Widow, the cursed woman. They'd crossed the street to avoid her shadow, whispering that she'd brought misfortune down on Thomas, that his death was somehow her fault. Thomas had been shot down over water rights, a dispute as old as the dirt itself. But the town didn't care about the truth. They just needed someone to blame, and a young widow living alone was the easiest target. So Clara kept to herself. She mended clothes for the few people who'd still deal with her, kept her chin up, and tried not to let the loneliness eat her alive. The cabin was all she had left of him. Every log, every nail, he'd put there with his own hands, dreaming of the horse ranch they were going to build. Now it was just her, a rocking chair he'd made, and a wedding photograph on the mantel, a picture of two young people smiling, with no idea how fast their world was about to end. The storm hit with the full force of a freight train. Snow blasted against the windows, a solid wall of white. The wind howled and the old cabin groaned, but Thomas had built it strong. Clara settled into the rocking chair with her mending, the steady rhythm of the needle a small comfort against the chaos outside. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It came from the stable, a sharp crack followed by a horse's panicked whinny. But it wasn't the familiar sound of her old mare Buttercup. This was deeper, more desperate. Her heart started hammering against her ribs. Travelers caught in the storm weren't unheard of, but most had the sense to be in town by now. To be out on the plains in this was a death sentence. She hesitated. A woman alone couldn't just open her door to any stranger on a night like this. It was an invitation to danger. But the thought of someone freezing to death, just yards from her fire, it sat like a stone in her gut. Another sound decided it for her, a heavy crash, followed by a dead, ominous silence. Something was very, very wrong. Grabbing Thomas's old shotgun from above the door, she pulled on his heavy coat, lit a lantern, and stepped out into the blizzard. The wind tore at her, the snow so thick she could barely see. The stable door was swinging wild on a broken hinge. Lantern light cut through the swirling snow, falling on a scene that stole the breath from her lungs. A big black horse stood trembling inside, but it was the shape on the floor that made her blood run cold. A man lay face down in the straw, motionless. A dark stain was spreading out beneath him, black against the gold. He wasn't just a traveler seeking shelter. He was a man who'd brought death with him to her door. Her hands shook as she knelt beside him, the shotgun still clutched in one hand. It took all of her strength to roll the heavy body over. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp features hidden under dirt and stubble. Blood was everywhere, soaking through his coat at the shoulder and along his ribs. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper in the frigid air. She pressed her fingers to his neck and found it. A pulse. Faint, but there. He was alive. Just barely. As if sensing her touch, his eyes snapped open. They were dark and shockingly alert. His hand moved with a speed that defied his injuries, darting toward the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. Clara froze. The barrel of her shotgun was pointed at the rafters, useless. She was alone, in a storm, with a wounded, dangerous man who was a split second from ending her life. "Easy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're hurt. I want to help you." His eyes scanned her face, then darted around the stable, sizing up every shadow, every exit. He was like a cornered wolf, ready to fight to the death. "Where?" he rasped, the word tearing from his throat. "Cedar Ridge," she said, keeping her voice as calm as she could. "My stable. You're bleeding bad. You'll die if I don't help you." Purr, a dry, bitter laugh escaped his lips, turning into a bloody cough. "Might be better that way." His hand fell from his gun. His strength was gone. "They'll be coming," he muttered. Clara's mind raced. An injured man. Armed. Talking about being pursued. She knew exactly what he was, an outlaw. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to leave him there. Go get Sheriff Brennan. There'd be a bounty, enough money to make her life a whole lot easier. But then she looked at his face again. She saw the defiance there, the refusal to surrender, and it reminded her so much of Thomas in his last moments. Her husband had died because powerful men had twisted the law to suit themselves. She knew better than anyone that the law and justice weren't always the same thing on the frontier. "Can you stand?" she asked, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. Surprise flickered in his dark eyes. "You don't even know what I've done. I know you're bleeding to death in my stable during a blizzard," she replied, her voice firm now. "That's enough for now." With a grunt of effort, she hauled him to his feet. He was heavy, all lean muscle, and he swayed like a tree in the wind, nearly taking them both down. Together they stumbled through the blinding storm, his horse trailing behind them like a shadow, seeking the warmth of the cabin's light. She guided him to the floor by the fire, the light revealing the true extent of his injuries. A clean bullet hole in the shoulder, a long, nasty graze along his ribs. Both were still seeping blood. "I need to get these cleaned and bound," she said, already moving to get water and clean cloths. "It's going to hurt." "Do what you have to," he gritted out, his eyes never leaving her. "Why are you doing this?" She paused, her back to him. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Maybe I'm just tired of watching men die." She worked by the flickering firelight, her hands surprisingly steady. She cut away his shirt, trying to ignore the network of old scars that crisscrossed his torso. This was a man who had lived his life by the gun. She poured whiskey from Thomas's last bottle onto the wounds, and the man bit down hard on a strip of leather, his body going rigid with pain, but he never made a sound. The bullet in his shoulder was lodged deep, far beyond her skill to remove. All she could do was pack the wound and bind it tight to stop the bleeding. But the gash on his ribs, she could fix that. With a needle from her sewing kit, she stitched the skin together with small, neat sutures. "You've done this before," he observed, his voice strained. "My father was a doctor back east," she said, her words clipped. "I learned a few things. Before she'd run away with Thomas, before she'd traded a life of comfort for a dream that had ended in blood. She helped him to the single bed in the back room, her bed, and covered him with every blanket she owned. His fever was already starting to burn. The next few hours would decide if he lived or died. Back in the main room, Clara sank into the rocking chair, the adrenaline leaving her weak and trembling. What had she done? She was harboring a fugitive. If the law found out, they'd hang her right alongside him. But she couldn't find it in her heart to regret it. Not yet. His saddlebags were by the door where she'd dropped them. It was an invasion of his privacy, but she had to know. She had to know what kind of trouble she had invited into her home. Inside, she found what she expected: ammunition, a little food, a flask. But tucked in a side pocket were two things that made her stop cold: a small, well-worn book of poetry, and beneath it, a tarnished silver badge, a Deputy U.S. Marshal's badge. She stared at it, her mind reeling. It had to be fake, or maybe a trophy, taken from a man he'd killed. But something about the way he carried himself, that weary alertness, didn't feel like an outlaw. It felt like a man who was used to being on the other side of the law. A low moan came from the bedroom. He was delirious, muttering words she couldn't understand. For the rest of the night she sat by his side, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, fighting to keep the fever from consuming him. Just before dawn, the fever broke. His eyes opened, clearer now, and they fixed on her face with a raw intensity. "What's your name?" he asked in Clara Morrison. "And yours?" Wynne hesitated for a long moment. "Jake. Jake Hartley." "Well, Mr. Hartley," she said, standing up, needing some distance, "you're going to live, but that shoulder needs a real doctor." She held up the badge. "There's this in your saddlebag." His jaw clenched. "Former. Not anymore." "What happened?" Jake closed his eyes, a flicker of pain crossing his face that had nothing to do with his wounds. "I found evidence. Judge Watson and his hired guns. They killed a homesteader family for their land. The Millers. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. When I went to arrest them, Watson turned it around on me, said I'd gone rogue, that I'd done the killing. He's got half the territory in his pocket. It was my word against a federal judge. Judge Watson, the same man who had presided over the joke of a trial after Thomas's death. The same man who had called his murder a justified shooting. "So you ran," she said, her voice flat. "I fought first," Jake corrected. "Killed one of Watson's men when they came for me. That's what sealed it. Turned me from a disgraced lawman into a wanted killer." He let out that bitter laugh again. "They'll hang me for sure if they catch me now." Clara walked to the window. The snow had stopped falling, and the world outside was a blanket of pure, unbroken white. The blizzard was over, which meant the hunt would begin again. They would follow his trail right to her door. "You should have left me in the stable," Jake said quietly from the bed. "Now you're a part of this." "Maybe," Clara said, turning to face him. "Or maybe I was already a part of it." She saw it clearly now. This wasn't some random outlaw. This was a man who had tried to stand up to the same evil that had destroyed her life. The same corruption. The same man. "Judge Watson was the man who let my husband's killers walk free," she said, her voice shaking with a rage she had kept buried for 2 years. Jake's eyes widened in understanding. They weren't strangers caught in a storm. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, washed up on the same desolate shore. And their enemy was the same. "Rest now," she told him, her voice stronger now, filled with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. "When you're stronger, we'll figure out what comes next." As Jake drifted back into a healing sleep, Clara went back to her vigil by the fire. The rising sun cast a pale light across the snow-covered plains. She had chosen mercy in the night, a simple act of compassion for a dying stranger. But now in the light of day, she saw that it was something more. It was a choice to fight back. The price for that mercy was going to be high, she knew that. It could cost her everything. But as she looked at the shotgun resting against the wall, she realized she had nothing left to lose. And for the first time in a long time, she had found something worth fighting for. The next morning they talked. Really talked. Jake, propped up against the wall by the fire, told her everything. He told her about the Miller family. Husband, wife, and 3 small children. The youngest just a little girl. Watson wanted their land for the creek that ran through it. When they refused to sell, he had them slaughtered in their beds and made it look like an Indian raid. "I found the proof," Jake said, his voice heavy. "Army shell casings. Boot prints that didn't belong. When I confronted Watson's men, they just laughed in my face. Said no one would believe a half-breed marshal over a respected judge." Clara's eyes widened. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw the subtle hints she'd missed before. The high cheekbones, the straight black hair. "My mother was Lakota," he said, confirming her thoughts. "My father was a white cavalry sergeant. It was enough to get me a badge when they needed a man who could track and speak the language. But it wasn't enough to make my word count against a man like Watson." He looked at her then. "Tell me about Thomas." So she told him. She told him about the dreamer from Ohio who could gentle the wildest Mustang. She told him about their 2 years of happiness, building this cabin, starting their herd. And she told him how it all fell apart, how Judge Watson had wanted their spring, how he'd sent his foreman, a cruel man named Reed, to threaten and intimidate them. "Sheriff Brennan was Watson's man even then," she said, her voice bitter. "Thomas tried to file complaints, but they just disappeared. Then one day Reed showed up with 5 men. They shot Thomas down on his own doorstep. Said he drew first." Her voice broke. "His gun was still in its holster when I got to him. He died right here, in my arms." They sat in silence for a long time after that. The only sound the crackle of the fire. 2 different stories, 2 different lives, but with the same villain at the center. "He's gotten bolder," Jake said finally. "The Miller family, that was just the latest. He thinks he's untouchable. And maybe he is." "No one is untouchable," Clara said, a fire lighting in her eyes. She went to a small wooden chest in the corner and pulled out a worn leather-bound journal. "Thomas documented everything. Every threat, every cut fence, every stolen horse. Dates, names, everything. After he died, I kept writing in it. I wrote down everything I saw, everything I heard. It's 2 years of Watson's crimes, all in one place. Jake's eyes lit with a flicker of hope. Evidence is one thing, but we need someone to listen. Watson owns the law around here. But not everywhere, Clara pressed, her mind racing. There have to be honest men somewhere. Federal investigators. Men who can't be bought. Her eyes met his across the small room. Your word alone might not be enough, and mine means nothing. But together, with this journal, together, Jake repeated, the word hanging in the air. You're talking about fighting back. I'm talking about justice, she corrected. The real kind, not the kind Watson sells. He was quiet for a long moment, the gears turning in his head. Then he looked at her, his gaze steady. It's dangerous, Clara. Watson has money and men. He'll kill us both without a second thought. He's already trying to kill you, she shot back. And how long do you think I'm safe? I'm a witness, a loose end. Sooner or later, he'll decide the grieving widow has grieved long enough. The truth of her words settled over them. They were both living on borrowed time. All right, Jake said slowly. We do this, but we do it smart. No grandstanding. We gather more proof, find allies, and then we strike. He paused, his expression serious. But Clara, you could still walk away. Take the journal, leave the territory, start over. Could you? She asked, her voice soft. Could you walk away and let the Millers' murders go unanswered? He looked down at his hands. No, he admitted. I couldn't. Then don't ask me to be less than you are. An alliance was forged in that moment, in the quiet of the snowbound cabin, an alliance born of grief and a burning need for justice. We'll need a plan, she said, her mind already moving. Watson will expect you to run for the border. When his men don't find you, they'll start checking every homestead. The snow will slow them down, Jake calculated. We have 2 days, maybe 3. Then we'd better make them count, Clara said. Outside, a wolf howled, a lonely cry in the vast, cold wilderness. But for the first time, Clara didn't feel so alone. The hunt was on, and this time, they weren't the prey. They were the hunters. That night, sleep was impossible. Clara insisted Jake take the bed to help his shoulder heal, while she kept watch by the fire. The silence in the cabin was thick with unspoken thoughts, with the gravity of the decision they had made. Around midnight, Jake came out of the bedroom, moving stiffly. You should rest, he said, his voice low. I can watch. I've forgotten how, she admitted. They sat in the dim firelight, 2 outcasts plotting to take down a king. Tell me about your mother, Clara asked, the question surprising even herself. A soft, sad smile touched Jake's lips. Her name was Morning Star. She tried to teach me both ways, the Lakota way and the white man's way. Said I'd need both to survive. He stared into the flames. She was right. As she got up to pour more coffee, he reached out and gently caught her hand. Thank you, Clara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For everything. For seeing a man. Not just the rest of it. She looked down at their joined hands, his dark and calloused against her pale skin. We're all outcasts here, she whispered. The touch lingered, a spark of warmth in the cold night, until a log shifted in the fire, breaking the spell. He pulled his hand away, his expression suddenly all business. We need to talk practicalities, he said. We need a plan to keep you safe. I'm part of this, Jake. I know, but a widow living alone is vulnerable. If Watson's men show up, they won't ask questions. But there's a way to make it harder for them to move against you. He hesitated, as if wrestling with the words. We could get married. Clara stared at him, speechless. What? Hear me out, he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. It's a paper marriage. For protection. As my wife, you have legal standing. It explains my presence here. A woman nursing her injured husband raises a lot fewer questions than a widow hiding a wanted man. I still have some friends in the Marshal Service, men who might listen if the request came from my wife. She stood up and paced to the window, her mind spinning. It was insane. It was a betrayal of Thomas's memory. And yet, it was brilliant. It was the one thing Watson would never expect. And after, she asked, her back still to him, after this is over? Then we go our separate ways, he said, his voice carefully neutral. No claims, no obligations. I'm just trying to keep us both alive, Clara. She pressed her hand against the icy glass, marrying a man she'd known for 2 days. A man with a price on his head. Was she really considering this? The preacher in town won't do it, she said, thinking out loud. He's Watson's man like everyone else. There's a traveling preacher, Jake said immediately. A man named Morrison. No relation. He makes the rounds through the mining camps. He's in Silver Creek right now. He's known for being less particular. He had already thought it all through. All right, she said, turning to face him, the decision made. I'll do it, but I have conditions. Name them. This is a partnership of equals. My knowledge of this area, my connections, they're just as important as your badge. And we maintain separate quarters. This is a business arrangement. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Of course. She sat back down, the weight of it all settling on her. There's one more thing. Thomas's grave is on the hill behind the barn. I go there every Sunday. That doesn't change. I wouldn't expect it to, Jake said softly. He was a lucky man, Clara. They fell quiet again. She found herself studying his face in the firelight, the hard lines carved by a hard life. He was nothing like Thomas, but there was a strength in him, a quiet integrity that called to something deep inside her. The town calls me the Black Widow, she said suddenly, the words tasting like poison. They whisper that I bring bad luck to any man who gets close to me. Jake's expression hardened. Let them whisper. We're not doing this for them. We're doing this for us. He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see right into her soul. The cursed widow and the outcast lawman. Maybe we're exactly what this town deserves. Maybe we write our own ending, Clara suggested, a flicker of a smile on her own lips. He nodded slowly. I think Thomas would want you to survive, Clara, by any means necessary. The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound. Tomorrow she would become a bride again. Not for love, but for war. As Jake went back to the bedroom, Clara pulled her chair closer to the dying embers. She thought of Thomas, of their dreams, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that he would understand. He had been a fighter. He would want her to fight too. Whatever came with the dawn, she would face it, but this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The journey to Silver Creek was tense. They traveled in Clara's wagon, Jake's black stallion tied to the back. Jake sat beside her on the bench, his face pale but his eyes constantly scanning the snow-covered horizon. Any rider, any plume of smoke, could be Watson's men. Silver Creek was a grimy mining town, a world away from the quiet plains. They found the preacher, Reverend Morrison, in a drafty wooden chapel. He was a man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that took in Jake's barely hidden injuries and Clara's somber dress. Marriage is a sacred covenant, he said, his voice gravelly. We understand, Reverend, Jake said, placing a small pouch of gold coins on the man's table. A donation for your mission. The Reverend's eyes softened. Do you have witnesses? Clara's heart sank. She hadn't even thought of that. But Jake just nodded toward the door. They're right outside. An older Mexican couple entered the chapel, their faces kind. Jake had helped them years ago, another good deed in a long life that was now coming back to help him. The ceremony was a blur. Clara stood beside Jake, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She slipped Thomas's wedding ring off her finger, her hands trembling, and tucked it safely into her pocket. Jake produced a simple gold band. Where he got it, she had no idea, and slid it onto her finger. The metal was cool against her skin. I now pronounce you man and wife, the Reverend intoned. He paused. You may kiss the bride. Clara hadn't expected that. Jake leaned in, his eyes asking for permission. His lips brushed against hers. A touch so soft and brief, it was barely there. But it sent a jolt through her that was anything but fake. It was nothing like Thomas's kisses, but it was something real. May God have mercy on you both, the Reverend said, a strange blessing that told Clara he knew exactly what kind of trouble they were in. They were halfway back to the cabin when they saw them, 3 riders on the horizon moving fast, Get down, Jake hissed, his hand already on his gun. There was nowhere to run. The wagon was slow, and Jake was in no shape for a gunfight. They were caught. As the riders got closer, Jake suddenly relaxed. It's all right, he said. That's Sam Daniels. He's a good man, no friend of Watson. Sam Daniels was a grizzled rancher with a face like a leather map. His eyes took in Clara's new ring, then Jake, and he seemed to understand everything in an instant. Mrs. Morrison, he said, tipping his hat. Or should I be saying Mrs. Hartley now? Mr. Daniels, Clara nodded, her heart still pounding. Sam, Jake said, we've got some trouble with Judge Watson. I heard, Sam said, his expression grim. His men are tearing the country apart looking for you. They paid a visit to the widow Thompson's place this morning. Scared her half to death. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. I'm getting damn tired of Watson acting like he owns this land. He looked straight at Clara. Your Thomas was a good man. What they did to him wasn't right. A lump formed in Clara's throat. It was the first time anyone in the territory had said that to her face. You two get on home, Sam said, gathering his reins. If Watson's men come asking, we haven't seen a thing. Far as anyone knows, Jake Hartley lit out for Montana days ago. He paused, his gaze serious. You've got friends in this territory, Jake. Don't you forget it. As they rode away, a fragile spark of hope ignited in Clara's chest. They weren't alone. Others were tired of living in fear. Others were ready to fight. That night, as she tended to Jake's wounds, the little cabin felt different. It was no longer just her refuge. It was theirs. Clara, he said, his voice quiet. He caught her hand. Today, I know it wasn't a real wedding, but I made a vow, and I intend to keep it. The intensity in his eyes was unsettling, and she gently pulled her hand away. As she prepared their meager supper, she tried to sort through the chaos of her emotions. She was married to a stranger, an outlaw, a lawman, a man who made her feel something, something she hadn't felt since Thomas. It was dangerous. This was an arrangement, a strategy, nothing more. But as she watched him fall into an exhausted sleep by the fire, his face finally peaceful, she couldn't deny the truth. Something had changed in that dusty chapel. Something had shifted when his lips touched hers, and it had nothing to do with survival. It was the terrifying, undeniable flicker of a new beginning. The weeks that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Life in the cabin became a delicate dance between quiet domesticity and the constant threat of discovery. Jake's shoulder healed, and with his strength, his presence in the small space grew. He was quiet, respectful, never crossing the invisible line she had drawn between them. But Clara was aware of him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. The way he moved, the low timbre of his voice, the rare smile that transformed his entire face. They were partners in a war, spending their nights poring over Thomas's journal and Jake's knowledge of Watson's network, plotting their next move. But during the day, they were just two people sharing a home. When their hands brushed as they worked, a current passed between them. When she caught him looking at her, a silent question in his eyes, her breath would catch in her throat. One afternoon, Mary Daniels, Sam's wife, arrived with a basket of supplies and a warning. Watson's getting desperate, she said, her cheerful face lined with worry. His men are getting rougher. People are scared, Clara, but they're getting angry too. She looked from Clara to Jake. Word is getting around about you two, about what you're planning. People are starting to hope again. Then she pulled a thick leather folder from her basket. Sam wanted you to have this. Copies of every dirty deal Watson has pushed through for the last 5 years. Land grabs, falsified tax records. It's all there. Jake's eyes gleamed as he looked through the papers. This is it, he breathed. This is the proof we need. As Mary was leaving, she pulled Clara aside. I know how this marriage started, dear, she said softly, but I see the way you look at each other. Don't let that man Watson steal any more from you than he already has. You deserve to be happy. Mary's words echoed in the sudden silence of the cabin after she left. She's right, you know, Jake said quietly. Clara's hand stilled. Jake, we agreed. I know what we agreed, he said, moving closer, his voice dropping. But these weeks with you, they've been more of a home than I've had in my entire life. We can't, she whispered, her heart hammering. It's not fair to Thomas. And you deserve more than a man with a price on his head, he countered, a sad smile on his lips. Maybe that's why we fit, Clara. Two broken people, making do. He stepped back, giving her space. I'll go check on the horses. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She touched the ring that hung on a chain around her neck now. Thomas's ring. She had thought her heart was buried with him on that lonely hill. But it wasn't. It was here, in this cabin, beating a frantic rhythm for the man in the next room. She found Jake sitting by the fire, the documents spread around him. I can't sleep, she said, her voice small. Jake, what are we doing? Because this doesn't feel like a business arrangement anymore. He looked up, his face etched with a vulnerability she had never seen before. It became real for me a long time ago, Clara. He stood and came to her, stopping just before her. I know your heart will always have a place for him. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for what's left. She looked up at him, at the man who had stumbled into her life and reignited a spark she thought was long dead. My mother told me the heart isn't a space that gets filled up, she said softly. She said it grows with every person you love. She reached up and touched his face. I've been so afraid that caring for you was a betrayal. But maybe it just means I'm still alive. He leaned down and kissed her. And this time, it wasn't the hesitant brush of a stranger. It was a kiss filled with all the unspoken words, all the shared danger, all the fragile hope that had grown between them in the firelight of the lonely cabin. It was a promise, a new beginning. Whatever future they had, it would be forged in danger and uncertainty. Watson was still out there. Justice had not yet been served. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, they had found something worth fighting for, something more than just revenge. The storm finally broke on a cold March morning. Clara was in the yard when she heard them, the thunder of a dozen horses coming fast. It was Reed, Watson's foreman, the man who had pulled the trigger on Thomas. And with him was Sheriff Brennan and a posse of hard-faced men. Hartley, Reed bellowed. We know you're in there. Come out, and maybe the woman lives. Jake was already at the door, rifle in hand. Stay back, he ordered her. But he was already stepping onto the porch, a lone man against an army. You're trespassing, Reed, Jake called out, his voice calm and steady. My wife and I would like you to leave. Your wife? Reed sneered. Funny. Judge Watson wants a word with you, Breed. The tension was so thick Clara could barely breathe. Jake was good, but he couldn't take them all. This was it. This was how it ended. Then a shot cracked through the air, but it didn't come from the posse. It came from the ridge behind them. Sam Daniels and a half-dozen other ranchers stood there, rifles aimed squarely at Reed's back. Morning, Reed, Sam called down. Looks like you got yourself lost. Reed's face twisted in fury. But then more riders appeared, and more. The ranchers, the farmers, the families Watson had terrorized for years. They had all come. An army of ordinary people, armed with hunting rifles and righteous anger. Reed was trapped, outnumbered, but a cruel smile spread across his face. You're all making a big mistake. I've got a telegram from the governor. $500 bounty on Jake Hartley's head. That's a lot of money, friends. There was a tense silence. $500 could change a man's life. Then old man Coleman, a rancher who'd lost his land to Watson, spat on the ground. Keep your blood money, Reed. We know who the real criminal is. Just as the standoff was about to explode into violence, a lone rider galloped up. It was Deputy U.S. Marshal Tom Garrett, one of Jake's old trusted friends. Reed, Garrett said, his voice ringing with authority, it's over. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of Judge Watson on charges of murder and corruption. He looked around at the posse, and for all of you as accessories. Reed's hand twitched towards his gun. Don't, Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. You can run or you can die here. Your choice. For a long, heart-stopping moment, Reed stared at Jake, his eyes filled with pure hatred. Then slowly, he turned his horse and galloped away, the rest of the posse scattering like rats. It was over. The siege was broken. The town had fought back. "It's not over yet," Marshal Garrett told them later. "We have to build a case that will stick. Your testimony, Clara, and Thomas's journal, that's what will finally bring him down." The trial of Judge Watson was the biggest thing the territory had ever seen. Jake and Clara both testified, their voices clear and strong, telling the story of Watson's reign of terror. One by one, their neighbors stood up and told their own stories of loss and intimidation. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, a cheer went up that shook the courthouse walls. Justice, real justice, had finally come to the Dakota Plains, but Reed was still out there. He had vanished the night before the verdict, a ghost in the wind, nursing a grudge. That summer, they began to rebuild. With the threat of Watson gone, life returned to the valley. Jake had been offered his badge back, but he refused. His place was here, with Clara, building the dream that Thomas had started. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Jake turned to her. "I love you, Clara Hartley," he said, and she knew it was true. "I love you too," she whispered, and in that moment the ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest. The peace didn't last. 3 nights later, she woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was a roaring inferno. Reed. He had come back for his revenge. Shots shattered the windows as riders circled the cabin, trapping them inside. They were outnumbered, outgunned. This was a fight for survival. Just as Clara thought all was lost, she heard it. A sound from her nightmares, a sound from her history, a high, piercing war cry. Out of the darkness, a dozen Lakota warriors on horseback descended on Reed's men, a whirlwind of righteous fury. It was Jake's cousin, Joseph Running Bear. They had heard of his fight against Watson, the man who had also stolen their lands, and they had come to stand with their kin. The fight was short and brutal. Reed, wounded, escaped into the night, but his gang was broken. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of their barn, they were surrounded by friends, his family and hers, the Lakota warriors and the ranchers from the valley. Together they started to rebuild. The new barn rose from the ashes, a symbol of a community that refused to be broken. A few weeks later, Marshal Garrett brought the final piece of news. Reed was dead, killed during a failed bank robbery in another territory. The shadow was finally, truly gone. That night, they walked up the hill to Thomas's grave. Clara placed wildflowers on the simple wooden cross. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jake took her hand. "We'll take care of it," he said. "The dream. We'll build it together." And they did. They built a life, a ranch, a family. They had found each other in the heart of a storm, two broken souls who had chosen mercy over fear and justice over vengeance. Their story became a legend on the plains, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, a single spark of hope, of love, can be enough to light the way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles just like Clara and Jake connected across their differences. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of frontier, courage, and romance. And please share your thoughts about Clara and Jake's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Let me know in the comments.